الواضح أن الحرب في أوكرانيا قد أبرزت حالة التوتر في العلاقات الأمريكية الإماراتية، والحقيقة أن هناك عوامل متراكمة صنعت في مجملها مثل هذا التوتر في عهد الإدارة الأمريكية الحالية، ومن ذلك عدم اليقين بشأن استمرار التزام واشنطن الأمن الإقليمي وعودة الاتفاق النووي من دون ضمانات لمعالجة تهديدات الميليشيات المتحالفة مع إيران. هناك تباين في المواقف والمصالح بين الولايات المتحدة ودولة الإمارات إزاء العلاقات مع الصين وروسيا. ظهر ذلك في أزمة أوكرانيا وملف الطاقة، كما ظهر في موضوع استخدام دولة الإمارات تقنيات 5G الصينية والاندماج في مبادرة الحزام والطريق. وقد تكون الأزمة الأوكرانية وملف إمدادات الطاقة وأسعارها فرصة حالية للطرفين لإعادة تعريف العلاقات الاستراتيجية بينهما ومعالجة نقاط الخلاف وخاصة التهديدات الأمنية. المؤكد أن هناك تطورات متسارعة في النظامين الإقليمي والدولي تفرض التوجه نحو حوار استراتيجي عميق يعيد ضبط العلاقات الإماراتية الأمريكية ويزيد التعاون الثنائي على مواجهة التهديدات المشتركة.
In the name of Allah, ladies and excellencies, dignitaries, good evening and peace be upon you. Ahmed Al-Abdouli, Strategic Studies and Scientific Research. We are honored today on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Sultan Mohammed Al-Nuaimi, General Director of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, to welcome with you. And in the first lecture of Emirates thinkers coming today under the title of Prospects for UAE-US Relations in a New Strategic Environment, said and delivered by one of the thinkers in UAE, esteemed thinkers in UAE, which Dr. Ibtisam Al-Kidbi. Dr. Ibtisam Al-Kidbi is the president of the Emirates Policy Center, which she founded in September 2013 in Abu Dhabi. The EPIC is one of the most prominent think tanks in the region, and it became the platform for Abu Dhabi Strategic Center as one of the most important platforms to discuss the international and regional security, and as a leader as best think tanks. And she was appointed as a result of this in the cumulative in the GCC, and it was featured in the Arabian Business in July 2018 as one of the most influencers in the Arab world, being the leader of think tanks in the Arab world. And in 2021, she was appointed as to the post-COVID-19 commissioner due to her contributions in the consequences of COVID-19 on the world and the Middle East. And before her establishment of Emirates Center, she was a professor of scientific political sciences in UAE University, and she occupied many positions as the general coordinator of Gulf Growth and membership of the Executive Council in the Arab Society of Political Science and Arab Unity and Arab Thought and the Arab Organization for Transparency and Combating Corruption. She published many of research papers, and 2 books are the last: The UAE Power Building Model and Foreign Policy Shifts in 2021, and the second one is just Back to the Table, Iran and Biden Administration, a potential return to negotiations. She had a PhD in political science from economics from science in Cairo University. Now we give and invite Dr. Ibtisam for starting the lecture with due thanks. Peace be upon you and Happy New Year. And Ramadan Kareem, and the blessed one for all of you. At the beginning, I would like to thank the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, represented in my brother Sultan Al-Nuaimi, the General Director of the Center, for this invitation. A generous invitation, actually, in this blessed month too, to meet and shed some light on the relation, UAE-US relations in the international context in the current courses. Maybe that the effects and the consequences of the Ukrainian war regarding the Emirates side, it highlighted the tension in the relationships between USA and UAE. There was actually some kind of tension, but this war highlighted it and brought it to the surface. Indeed, there are contrast, disparity in priorities, interests regarding oil and power supply, the prices, the amount of production, and regarding the wagering on the American betting that UAE as an ally will to help to fill the gap in the oil and power supply, to compensate the Russian power supply to Europe. After the imposition of sanctions on Russia by USA because of the Iranian dispute and war, at the beginning, I'll talk the Emirati stance and position from the Ukrainian crisis. And here we'll shed light on the Emirati stance versus what is going on in Ukraine. This war and the crisis that was an important factor in highlighting this disparity and contrast between UAE and America regarding their viewpoints and their differences in their interests and the priorities regarding some files. And hence, and here we can indicate to the following. First, in the framework of its national interests and independent policy, UAE has affirmed its commitment to OPEC Plus agreement with Russia and the member states, and refused till now increase the production of oil at maximum capacity and called for an agreement. UAE called for that we have to neutralize power supply from polarization or politicizing this file, and concentrated on the importance of to the market equations, supply and demand. The other issue is UAE tried to avoid the polarization between the superpowers, the major powers. This attraction, polarization between USA, Russia, China, and consequently abstained from voting in United Security Council, United Nations Security, on the resolution condemning the so-called Russian invasion to Ukraine. But in the General Assembly, it supported the condemnation of the Russian intervention in Ukraine. But this stance, honestly and candidly, UAE reaped that Moscow voted in favor of UAE for the embargo and ban of Houthis arming or supplying them with arms and enlisting Houthis as terrorist organizations. So it is balanced and mutual. The other issue also that UAE remained kept calling to alleviate the tension between Russia and Ukraine, and sought to support diplomatic solutions, encouraging the parties and the efforts of mediation to terminate or end the war. That was clear, and you have seen it, witnessed this. Same time, also, UAE kept communicating with all of the crisis parties, Ukraine, Russian, or the Western, and did not sever the communication with any or relations with any party. The last issue, the UAE at the same time gave aids and assisted the refugees and who displaced. And today we had the Ukrainian ambassador. He was thanking for the assistance UAE gave to Ukraine in this regard through Poland for the refugee of Ukraine, and facilitated the entry of those who were stuck and stranded. We move to the second part related to reasons of that tension in the relations between the US-UAE relations. Is it really just related to the last position or to the Ukrainian crisis and war, or it has some roots in to the past? In fact, there are a group of factors, cumulative factors, and they are not only related to the UAE stance to not to increase its production of oil. Let me say that part of that tension is not attributed to this. Part of it is related to the democratic administration, Obama's administration, and with the beginning and the start of talking about turning around Asia. And also, that was accompanied by the agreement, nuclear agreement with Iran, 2015, and ignoring the demands of the Gulf. Related ignorance, also ignoring the interests of the Gulf related to inviting them to be part of the agreement. It was part of that agreement in the beginning, or it was done behind the backs of these states. That was kind of the root. And also this part that was accumulated with the advent of the Arab Spring, and the American administration siding with the calls for toppling and regimes, and also their position with allied countries. So this is the root. Trump administration came and the relations improved in regard to the feeling of the Gulf states that the relations became strong with the American administration under Trump and related to Iranian file and others. With arrival of, but this feeling is still of this feeling of uncertainty that USA is not committed to the regional security. Emirates, UAE, and the Gulf states have that feeling. But with the arrival of Biden's administration, it appeared there is apathy, cooling, even with the beginning. There is differences and divergence in the priorities between the two sides for many files in the region, such as Iranian challenge, the Iranian-backed militias, and the Emirates' estimation or understanding that USA did not deal with the Houthis' strikes and attacks on UAE in a way that reflects the robust relation and alliance between the two countries. The UAE felt disappointed, felt bitter for this American response. So UAE was frustrated because the response was late, delayed, and not enough, not sufficient. Consequently, Washington thought this administration was thinking all the time of going back to a nuke agreement and not taking into account the priorities of the region, which are the ballistic threat, drones, militias supported by Iran, but also it exacerbated when there was a talk to delist or remove the list of the Republican Guard from the terrorist list. That showed that USA doesn't regard or give any consideration to the interests of its allies in the region. Also, Washington did not respond to UAE to enlist the Houthis on the terroristic list. And the Houthis were removed from the terrorism list that was approved by Trump's administration, and also refused to classify the Houthis as a terrorist group, even after attacking UAE. This is the first matter. Secondly, the elections, the American elections, and ignoring Trump heritage. Biden's administration also was doing the same as Obama's administration. There's no difference. They want to withdraw and reverse everything Trump did, whether agreements or resolutions. So the administration decided to reverse the foreign policy during the Trump era. Exactly. So especially related to the American position towards Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, even Israel under Netanyahu's government. This, of course, Biden's administration describes this transformation as towards democracy in the foreign policy of the United States. And last week, Dr. Anwar Gargash said in his lecture, he pointed that to this classification between the Western classification and that they are two pillars, two groups, democratic and the other one, the dictatorial governments. The criteria should be governance, wise governance. This is something new, and that democracy is not one course through history. Every country has its own experience and development throughout history. The last point in regard to the roots of the tension between the two countries, UAE and USA, this is also important point, is the contrast in the positions and the interests between USA and UAE versus Russia and China. And that appeared clearly in two things. Ukraine crisis in the power file and the usage of UAE to the technology of China 5G from China, and also being part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But also there was an American accusation of UAE that it has a military base of China, and this, of course, that resulted in freezing the F-35 deal Trump-Biden promised of. Now I move with you to the scenarios. How? The scenarios to manage this tension between USA and UAE. We have 4 scenarios. First, the continuity of this current situation, status quo, as it is. This is status quo scenario that the steps taken by United States to reassure UAE as for the containment of the Iranian challenge, militias related to mass missiles, drones, are steps not sufficient, and there is a state of uncertainty regarding the commitment of the United States towards of the security of its allies and the security of the region. The second point is Blinken's tour and his meetings with the Nakab, Morocco, and his meeting with His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. This shows the care of United States to reassure its allies in the region. Reports are Blinken has apologized for His Highness Mohammed bin Zayed in delayed response to the Houthis attacks on UAE. Our ambassador in USA, Yusuf Al-Utaiba, stated that Blinken's meeting with His Highness Mohammed bin Zayed relaxed the tension between the two sides, USA and UAE, created some positive atmospheres, and also we heard that there is abandon for striking terroristic groups. And the Central Region Declaration made many declarations that this idea must be reconsidered. This scenario shows that United States doesn't. It is true that it gives reassurances to its allies, but doesn't give genuine guarantees, tangible guarantees indeed for its allies. Binding to deal the defense or consideration of UAE's in its national policies that is independent and its right in diversifying its partnerships, whether with China, Russia, or with any other countries, because UAE has its own interests. This scenario reflects that Blinken's tour and the messages conveyed, friendly messages, did not lead to create American response, practical one, to the demands and requests of UAE. American position will still be ambiguous, indeterminate, will be concerning. America will keep just giving assurances, partial steps, just managing the crisis between Iran and the Iran-backed militias from one side and the Gulf states on the other side, without reaching a solution to disentangle this combat. And United States will keep pressuring in regard to the UAE relations with Beijing and Russia. This is the first scenario. The second one, most likely, in my opinion, is that the scenario widening the framework, the strategic one, with to the relations between United Arab Emirates and USA, deepening this framework, identifying the relations between the two sides, USA and UAE, This scenario shows that the alternative, the more realistic scenario for this, the tension between the two countries, that the two sides keep talking, keep the dialogue, whether official, strategic dialogue, or friendly, that lead to a strategic framework, a new one regarding the relations between the two countries, to deepen these relations, re-identify these relations in harmony with the changes taking place in the international environment and the regional environment. So it is a framework, defense framework, strategic framework, a new one, but it is not an official alliance. But we can call it a credible, reliable partnership to take the security partnership to a higher level, to reaffirm the strategic relationship, put clear objectives, realizable objectives on the mutual and bilateral or multilateral levels. This scenario will include action task between UAE and USA to confront ballistic missiles and drones. Second point, there should be communication, constant communication and dialogue between the two governments at the institutional level, institutional communication between the two countries, and promoting the military capabilities of UAE. The third is to inclination towards developing and promoting the security institutions, the military institutions of UAE, to face the threats by UAE own capabilities, so that UAE will be able by itself to face any threats through military and weapons to deter any attacks or enmity. This framework requires providing information to UAE about the activities that might be a cursor or indicator for future attacks, warning system, early warning systems about attacks, so that these attacks will not come without being warned. This will lead in the result, or at the end, that UAE will have its own early warning systems used by USA. Also giving UAE with the drones, Predator drones, which is very sophisticated drones. And this, of course, that will give UAE power and tip the balance in its favor, and it will pre-warn UAE about any attacks. This scenario also will include reactivating, providing UAE of F-35, which was frozen without any valid reasons, in my opinion. Third one, to enter or conclude a defense pact with USA. UAE has always wanted to reach guaranteeing its security in a more effective, a more committed way from the United States, like defense pacts between concluded between USA and NATO countries or member states, other allies who are enjoying defense pacts such as Japan, South Korea. Now we will discuss all these files. I will just continue. This needs an approval from the Congress, 2/3 from the Congress members. In this, under this partisan polarization, and currently it's impossible because of this polarization or partisan polarization. United States say that any defense pact with UAE requires that there should be a comprehensive infrastructure that is not available now. The last scenario, which is collective security, which is having a regional security umbrella. Now it is being circulated in reports from research centers and think tanks that Israel, cooperating with its allies in the Middle East, to build a common or a joint defense pact to counter and combat missiles and drones from enemies, Iran and the others. This scenario comes similar to pact that was in the pact under Trump, and that was suggested to form an alliance similar to NATO's pact. This scenario sees this is not related to UAE, and here all of the Gulf states will be part of such, Turkey and Israel, and they will have defense and security cooperation. Abrahamic Accords opened the doors actually to talk about this. The last Houthis attacks on UAE facilitated and made it easy the circulation of such scenarios and frameworks. The Israelis were rejecting this to give UAE. They believe that this is very sensitive and such techniques should not, or technology should not go outside Israel, because they were afraid that they would fall in the hands of the Iranians. The last attacks encouraged the Israelis to exchange with UAE and agree on such a framework. But the problem of such system, we are still talking about the Gulf states, there are still some differences that will barrier such establishing such a collective umbrella. United States, actually, they are criticizing, but I can say to the Americans, you did not encourage the Gulf states. You went into bilateral agreements with each side alone. The conclusion that this Ukrainian crisis, in fact, highlighted the strategic importance of the Gulf states, the impacting and effective role on the international arena for the security of power and the international competition. Before this stage, there was a pressure, Western pressure, on to limiting and decreasing the oil under the umbrella that climate change, or the claim of the climate change. But this crisis also brought some ambivalence in this region. Where is the climate change you've been talking about? Now you are asking me to increase my production of oil to the market. The last thing that this crisis also presents a opportunity to re-identify our relations with the Americans, the American-Emirati relationships, and to present new approaches and mechanisms to deepen the partnership, the strategic partnership with the United States, developing this relation, containment of tension, and going towards more institutions, not only based on who occupies the White House, whether Democratic or Republic. It should be more institutionalized. The American state, not with the parties, regardless or irrespective who is in the White House. And I'm against that. It is time now to give up and abandon United States. United States will keep being as an active and effective, important actor. I don't believe there is any decrease in its power and power. There is some defect, there is some gap indeed, but United States is still leader in power, in military, in technology. So we cannot sacrifice this relationship, but to move this or to take this relationship to put the Emirati interests on the table. So the others have priorities that should be considered. There should be candid, open discussion, serious one with the United States, not in the framework of just taunting. The region will not be able to stop being ally or the alliance with the United States. I know there is a trend now to go to the east, but I know from politicians and experts that America will not leave the region. It's important for the security of the United States, important for it's true that the Chinese threat is very big for the United States, but it doesn't want this region to fall in the hands of China. You want to balance. You need to balance rationally and smartly the relationships. You need everyone, and you need to get out of this polarization. And I say this, and thank you very much, and sorry for being long. Thank you, Dr. Pissan, for this strategic assessment for the United States and Emirati relations and the changes that befall them, especially the Ukrainian crisis, which showed the sharpness of the disagreement and differences between the United States and the Gulf states, mainly Emirates. My question is the security side. We see there is repositioning, reset for the Americans. That was showed from their withdrawal from Afghanistan. Also, the combating forces in Iraq now, they are just consultative. Yemenite file and its consensus, and it's the American position. Can the Gulf states, with other Arab states and allies like Israel, to build a regional security system without the United States, or the existence of the United States is important at this time? Let me tackle this in a way that takes us back, that it is not new. This topic was presented, the reset, repositioning, since Obama's administration, and the nuclear agreement with Iran, that this agreement will bring security and peace to the region, and we will face and confronted China. But what happened is different, because Iran became even more intrusive, instability, encroachment in Iraq, in Syria, militias. So what the Americans said or imagined did not happen. The idea was that America wanted to lead from behind. That was the principle. Trump said when he came that we need to participate in burden. Trump said, I will not do that alone. You have to be with me to take part in the confrontation. You have also to pay for the costs with me. You have to bear costs. I will not do it alone. That's what Trump said. Now we come with Biden. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, they acknowledged that it was a strategic mistake, whether timing-wise, during time of Taliban, because it was a plan to take place in winter. So the consequences will not be the same as happened when the withdrawal took place. It was a strategic mistake, but Biden's administration took that despite all of the caveats presented by the Pentagon. The United States will remain. The idea of the United States was holding that the agreement, the accord with Israel also thought to bring peace to the region, and there would be kind of participation under umbrella of security. But there are also, under this, Turkey now, for example, also make a detour with the Americans or Israel. But I don't believe that under the existence of with the Iranian arsenal, you will be able to turn your back to the Americans. You have to keep alliance with United States. That's why I say that no power can replace the United States in guaranteeing security, even if the United States wanted to be Israel in its place. But there's a problem. There's a problem. However, that's why I believe that in the foreseeable future, the region will attract. Even if they want to turn their backs to the region, they can't. The problems and balance of powers in the region will bring them back. Thank you for this sufficient response. There are many experts say that United Arab Emirates can present a model for the bilateral relations that balance the relationship between the United States and China, Russia. Can the United Arab Emirates achieve this under the taking or given the latest Ukrainian dispute and the crisis? I indicated, I think, that United Arab Emirates succeeded in the Security Council not to abstain from voting, and the General Assembly by voting in condemnation of the invasion of Russia to Ukraine. That was balanced. Emirati leadership is conscious, aware of to the size, capabilities, to the determiners of the international community and the regional environment where it lives. It realizes that we cannot do without the states. There are challenges, there are differences, there is tension, and there are challenges in this relationship, but America will remain our strong, a basic, essential ally to us, and we cannot do or dispense with it. My relationship is not who is governing the White House. My relationship should be with institutions that will show the due respect to the Emirati model, to the Emirati leadership, to the Emirati interests and the priorities, and believe that Emirates is a regional player who can fill the gaps, even in case if the military stamp I think there is still opportunity to present that I am interested in having relations, partnership with China, with Russia. I'm interested in balancing all of these relations in balance, keep them in balance. But I would say not that neither China nor Russia will guarantee my security. Security will remain in the hands of the Americans. Now I leave the questions to the audience. If anyone wanted to give a question or intervention. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ibtissam, for this valuable lecture that touched all of the topics with objective approach. As for what I want to present, that this is the first time the Americans are clashing with the Emirati resolution and the Saudis. So I believe that we have moved from one stage where we being ordered, now we are in the stage of making our policies. This is a progress, development. And let's take it for granted that we cannot be outside the international system presided by the United States. Even if we have relations with Russia and China, this is kind of tactics to reposition and reset and make our way to progress ahead and make headway to book our place for our foot in the future. I think this is the first test. And we are going to pass it. And the Americans will accept this because will acquiesce to this. Even if they wanted to face and confront China, they have 3 pillars to confront China. Europe, one of them, East of Asia and Middle East, of which we are part. They need, especially to the economic blocks such as the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis, and they understand this. Many of the senators and in the congressmen were supporting this. Biden's policy and the administration was characterized by uncertainty and did not give assurances to the allies. We are not to be allies, it's alliance, but there is criticism to the Biden's administration, and they are aware that, and the Americans, what is good, they are not shy. Even if they are defeated, they would say or acknowledge that they are defeated. Blinken came about Afghanistan. He said, we have withdrawn strongly to confront China and the challenges coming from them. I believe that this is an advanced step for the Emirates and even our brothers in Saudi Arabia, that we are moving ahead, and they are now acknowledging now that the Americans that we have our own opinion in what is presented in our policies, and any forum or alliance or pact, if the Americans are not there, will not be as serious or importance. Especially we are close to Iran. Until now, Iran did not come to accept the international system and the nationalist states to deal with Iran. Its policies based on militias approaches, not statehood. Thank you very much to Dr. Ibtissam for this lecture. allow me, Doctor, the developments on the ground that took place recently showed that Al-Houthis groups, militias, were consent to give messages to challenge the international community. On the 5th of the resolution of the Security Council, Your Excellency appointed, it launched a missile towards the Red Sea. Also went back to a high level of attacks, 14 ones on the Saudis, compared to 6 or 4 in February or January before the resolution. It increased in smuggling of weapons because the Yemeni army intercepted tens of weapons at Al-Mahra borders. Now, in the framework of the American Navy last week, on the new Navy tasks and the undertaking of these tasks last Sunday, do you think that this declaration and the new task force is the second, or within the second scenario you pointed to, in relation to the re-identification of the relationship and documenting and expanding the strategic relationship, leading to or conducive to a broader mechanism to achieve and realize the security for the Gulf? Or just an attempt, complacent step, United States trying to contain some differences that came to the surface recently? Thank you. Regarding to the, I think it comes under the first scenario, which is giving assurances, reassurances, and I don't think the Gulf states. I think it is more towards the protection of the Israeli ships, but I don't think that is having that weight. And I think that betting, the American bet is an attempt to reverse Trump's administration policies and resolutions as to remove of the Houthis from the terrorist organizations. The second was just kind of a flirting with Iran. We remember the same language was used during Obama's administration. There was an attempt to not instigate the anger of Iran and make it reluctant to sign the agreement, and not to list the Houthis on the terrorist groups. And again, once again, Iran fear that Iran will turn its back and abstain from signing the agreement. Until now, we are witnessing this dilemma that Iran, the Republican Guard, to be removed from the terrorist groups lists. And now there is reluctance and hesitation in the American administration. And we are still just moving in the vicious circle, and we don't know how things are going to go and end. In Obama's administration, Iran imposed its will for signing the agreement, but there is a fear also that the same acceleration or rush that take place, because Obama wanted to leave an heritage that its administration or his administration signed an agreement with Iran. There is also a fear that this administration, due to the old age of Biden, and the possibility that he will not have a second term, although they tend that he will run for office. And in this case, he is 80 years. He will be 80 years old. But I believe that the same rush, the same speediness that we witnessed in the previous time, we were living, and we are living now the same. Thank you, Doctor, for this lecture. And that under the talks taking place in Vienna to the Iranian nuclear agreement, and at the same time Iran is seeking to own nuclear capabilities. What is your assessment of the future relationship or any transformation in the foreign policy of United Arab Emirates if Iran could possess nuclear military powers before signing the agreement? I think there is a declaration of the officials, and Dr. Gorgash, the diplomatic advisor of the president, that United Arab Emirates doesn't seek tense relationships, especially with its new policies in the 50th period, and that the relationships should be institutionalized. And the latest declaration that we don't wish for a tense relation with the Irans, but Iran is a nuclear power. I believe that for the Gulf states, we always repeat that our problem is not in the nuclear capabilities of Iran, because we all know that possessing the nuclear weapons is just for deterrence, not for usage. Our problem is in the ballistic missiles and the scope of these missiles and the number of these missiles. The drones also, there is an increase in the production and the budget. Big, and the biggest increase in the budget went to the Republican Guards. And we found that most of this budget goes towards developing drones. They are not as costly as missiles, not easy to track, and the launcher such as missiles, so that you can evade the accountability at the international level. The nuclear weapons, I believe that the Iranians, they are smart and they are shrewd. They are at the brink of the nuclear threshold. It's better for them than to announce or to become that they are a nuclear power, because if they announce that they are a nuclear power now, it will turn all the other powers, such as even their allies such as China and Russia, will be against them. So that will not be benefiting them. They want to keep at the thresh of that nuclear and keep blackmailing. So this blackmail is even better for the Iranians. United Arab Emirates is siding with the international community that Iran should not become a nuclear power, but on the other side, this is the demand that you are negotiating with Iran. Put the missile capabilities on the files. Militias be part of the negotiations. They are very dangerous for the United Arab Emirates. The drones should be included also in the negotiations. Last question. Thank you very much, Doctor, for this lecture and for the administration of this center for this gathering. There could be a fifth scenario, which is the rapprochement between or through the visit of Sheikh Tahnoun. May God bless him. So, I mean the fifth scenario, that the visit of His Highness Sheikh Tahnoun, I believe that this is the fifth scenario, because the Houthis classification as terrorist group was not at as was desired at the American level. What is your opinion, Your Excellency? Let me clarify. let me say Biden's administration, when it issued the last classification of the Houthis and removal or as a terrorist group, it wasn't as strong or as desired by the Emirates. So there was a new recourse made by United Arab Emirates. I understand now that you want to reverse Trump's policies and heritage and remove them from the terrorist groups. But given the attacks, this is normal. They did not attack me only. They also attacked your base in Al-Zafra. This was a real cause for reclassifying them as terrorist group. That was what made the Emirati feel bitter, feel frustrated. It was clear that this group is terrorist without discussion. But the whole point that the relation is with Iran, the American-Iranian relationship is at stake, is always at stake. The nuclear agreement is just to satisfy and be complacent to the Iranians at the expense of the Emiratis. Even in the same relation, also the feeling or the superiority. The Emirate now at a level mature enough that the relationship between the two countries to be as peers, not subordinate and master, someone who gives orders and someone who implements those orders. No, UAE now is mature enough at the military level, at the political level, and also its role in the regional level. You yourself, America, acknowledged, and you collaborated with the Emirates in Africa and Yemen against terrorism. So it is not becoming to deal with me in this superiority, and there must be kind of dialogues in that we are turn our backs this relationship. We need the Americans, but we need official dialogues, friendly dialogues, think tank to think tank, research centers, deepening these dialogues, but we cannot just say, no, I don't want this relation with the Americans and we'll head eastward. That's not rational, this is not logical, this is not wise, this is not strategic. You need to preserve your independence, show your interests, but you have to acknowledge that United States is an important ally, and we have to understand that, or he should understand that our priorities and interests and must be respected. Thank you very much, Dr. Ibtisam Al-Kidbi, for this vision, the strategic vision for the political scene in the Middle East generally, and the relationship with the United States. You pointed out to many important files, whether starting from the Ukrainian dispute and many other files, Iranian one, repositioning or reset, power and oil file under the Ukrainian crisis. On behalf of the General Director of the Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, we re-thank you, and we also thank the audience for their interaction that enriched the lecture. Hopefully we see you soon again in other lectures. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to my brother and my friend Dr. Sultan, and for the esteemed center and for the audience.